I think we should get started. My name is Emily Neal, and this is part of a program seated in the library called HLS Beyond, in which we bring you events and programming that are aimed at enhancing your humanity, perhaps not curricular, but definitely vital and relevant to who you are as humans and who you will become. Jay-Z is one of Jay-Z's brainchildren, actually, so he's the moderator here today. He's going to introduce our guests, and we're going to take it from there. So thanks for coming, and enjoy the conversation.
Thank you so much, Emily, both for the introduction and for organizing this program specifically, and HLS Beyond more generally. We have like a QR code or to learn more about it or a URL or something for HLS Beyond?
I'm sorry?
Is this not clear with the Matt?
It's not.
Yeah. All right, I'm going to take my chances. The panel that's worth COVID.
He loves how I change my mind.
That's right. There we go. And then learn to regret it. I was just asking, do we have like a URL or something for HLS Beyond so people can learn about the rest of the program?
Oh, right. We are, you know what, that's funny. It's harder than I would like to admit it is. So it's because it's the library website, and then it's buried within there. But
if you Google it, it'll probably be the first hit.
It will come right up.
Or Bing.
Or my name, Emily Neal, will come right up. And if you've ever signed up for something, you'll always hear from me. And there's, as I always remind you, if you have an idea for something that you'd like to help make a reality, you can send me an email through the website or just directly. I'd love to work with any of you to bring something interesting to your peers.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And we are now in our third banner year of this particular flavor of panel, Why I Changed My Mind. And I think the original conception of it was, as academics, as citizens, as people, we try to, I think at times, both be bold and humble at the same time about our commitments, ready to revise in the face of new facts, of new views, of growth, of reflection. And you can usually spot an academic versus most other occupations where in other occupations, oh God, I got this completely wrong, is usually blah. But wow, I got this wrong, how interesting. Now, I don't know if I know any academics who are like, I can't wait to publish a retraction, but to the extent they can say, here's a version 2.0, or here's a way in which I evolved, that is the conceit, even with the kind of ricketiness of the marketplace of ideas as a concept. Certainly the idea of getting people into a room and out of their difference, having an exchange of views in a way that shifts where people are at, that's the kind of bread and butter and also the highest purpose in a way of truth-seeking and of, here at a law school, justice-seeking. It's easy enough to, at times, forget it when at a law school we ask people to arbitrarily adopt a view and advocate for it, and then sometimes on a dime be like, now argue the opposite. Well, that's my job. And off to the races. And actually figuring out, well, what's underneath? What do you really think? And having that be more a verb than a noun is what the panel's about. So with that sort of introduction, I am so interested to hear what each of the three of you have to offer about some either moment or tectonic shift about which you looked back and said, I am the river of Heraclitus. You can't step in me twice. That's terrible. I've changed my mind. And Ruth, why don't we start with you if you'd like? Is that fair enough? And we could start with Janet. I could change my mind. Janet, would you like to start? There we go. And feel free just to introduce yourself a little bit too. Yeah.
The idea is that we're just each going to lay out the basics.
Correct.
And have a conversation.
That is exactly right.
Great. So I came into law teaching with two big political projects. One was feminism, and my feminism was very much dominance feminism. It was very close to Catherine McKinnon's feminism, as it was then.
And it was male domination, female subordination is a structural fact about the world that you could detect again and again in many, many places where you might not even suspect it to be there. And that would be, that would be about a women's liberation project or a women's emancipation project. I also had a very strong commitment to the lesbian and gay movement as it existed at the time. We didn't have all the other initials then. And there had been a couple of major traumas. There had been HIV, which was wiping out my friends, gay men, the age of this audience, most of this audience. It was, once you had the virus, there was no, you were going to die. There's simply no question about that. And there was no ameliorating or any cocktail, nothing. And Harvard against Bowers, in which the Supreme Court said in the end of my first year in law school that it was perfectly okay for the states that criminalized homosexual sodomy. And I wrote about that a lot. And I was working with Eve Sedgwick, who wrote Epistemology of the Closet on a concept of homosexual panic, that under conditions of secrecy of the closet, there was a certain kind of retaliation against people for not being gay, but for being an object of attraction by a person who was both attracted to same-sex objects, but also terrified of the fact that that was true about themselves, and that they would turn on that person and blame them. We called it homosexual panic. So later, in my career at Stanford, I got appointed to run the law school's fledgling, brand new sexual harassment effort. It wasn't Title IX then, it was Title VII. It was about employment. And we had a case. I always believed the women. I just simply always believed the women, and that proved to be true. I would have graduate student after graduate student after graduate student who was working on, you know, the left wing of the tsetse fly and couldn't change director, and you know, it was really almost impossible to get a solution for these people. So it was very frustrating. And then we got a case in which a woman on the staff was accusing men of groping her. One male professor in the copy room. Now you have to understand, back then copy rooms were broom closets into which a thing the size of a Prius had been stuffed. And it was a transitional thing about copying. We were troubled by that, and because he seemed to profess complete and total non-memory of the event, and we didn't know what to do. And so, to my shame, we had me go to him, and say, we're not going to tell you who's accusing you, we're not going to tell you what you did, but just don't do it again. Holy God, the look on his face. And then she had another complaint. She complained that a very prominent professor on the faculty had had too much eye contact with her in the hallway, and that this manifested his will to restrict her space sexually in the law school. Well, one of my cases in the Hardwick against Bowers homosexual panic, gay men are my friends, I'm almost a gay man kind of thing. I used to have my hair cut so short that I would tell the guy who was cutting my hair, cut my hair so short that I get called sir for 2 weeks. I don't do that anymore, but it was great while it lasted. One of the cases was a case under Don't Ask, Don't Tell, the military's anti-gay policy, in which a service member went into the mailroom to get his mail, and was the clerk behind the troop behind the counter felt that there was too much eye contact and reported him, and under the Don't Ask, Don't Tell protocols, he was discharged from the military for manifesting a propensity to engage in homosexual conduct. And all of a sudden, these two cases just crashed together in my mind. A case that I was struggling with. We were having lunch after lunch after lunch, meeting after meeting after meeting, trying to figure out what to do with this woman who was complaining in the law school. And it suddenly occurred to me, it was like a wham! There could be such a thing as heterosexual panic, and women could have it. That she could be a very sympathetic figure, that we could really care about her, but we wouldn't take it for granted that her accusations that there had been wrongful conduct to her were per se true. And that reoriented everything for me. It took me 10 years to work that out.
Can I ask, before we talk to Juliette, in that example, you were working with colleagues. You were part of a committee or a group
Yes.
that was weighing these things.
I was in many groups.
Yes.
Yeah.
And would you say that the group's view evolved similarly, if not identically, or was this more of a singular journey for you?
At that time, the anti-Don't Ask, Don't Tell coalition was rock solid. There was simply, we were up against Heartbreaking and some Bowers and Don't Ask, Don't Tell, so there was no reason to have splits. But the sexual harassment team that I was on, we really were nonplussed, JC. We just had lunch after, as I said, lunch after lunch, meeting after meeting. What are we going to do with this case? Because we're coming in with what's now called always believe, but we were unable to feel confident that we would go to the next faculty member and say, we don't know what you did, can't tell you who's accusing you, but just don't do it. We just couldn't do it anymore.
And so was it a schism within your group, or was it the whole group shifted?
It was a very small group. There were just about 4 or 5 of us, and at the university level.
Yeah.
And the law school is usually in the vanguard on this kind of reform, and so yeah, it was. But for me, it had profound intellectual implications as well. And there, I was dealing just with myself. What was I going to do with the fact that I suddenly could no longer see men as the devil and women as the angel? She wasn't a devil. She was a very hurting person, and she needed a lot of care and attention and reorientation towards her job and love, but she didn't need to have a big male professor punished. That actually wouldn't have addressed her problem. So it uprooted everything for me.
Got it. Thank you. I don't know if there are any questions or thoughts before we move to Juliette.
Oh, hi.
Hello.
Hello, everyone.
Welcome, Juliette. You
So-
just came in from the Boston Public Library.
Yes, and I'm heading to DC in a couple hours for that fun State of the Union thing, which I work for CNN. You won't see me. If everyone's alive, you won't see me, but I do backup. I do backup on Mayhem. So, okay, so that's where I'm going to go. I feel like, okay. So I graduated from here, and I think I was going through slight PTSD, so I brought notes. And, oh my God, I haven't practiced law for a long time. But actually, this is not, well, it's kind of about law. So I thought I would talk about my issue, which is like sort of a transformative shift. I come from the world of Homeland Security and safety and security, talk about that shift, what led me to it, and then the fears, which will be obvious, of why, of being more public, just like I think you encountered if you start to say, well, maybe believe woman is not the approach, the sort of backlash by people who you might not agree with, and I sort of had the same thing. So in 1999, 2 students at the Columbine High School walked in and killed 12 students. And I studied disasters and mayhem, and how people die matters, because then you can learn from them. 10 of them died in the school library. So this is Columbine. So, and that launched and you are considered Generation Lockdown. That launched the way we think and train and respond to active shooter cases in a nation that brings more than one a day now, presumably. Most of you were probably raised as Generation Lockdown. You probably did tests and other things and training and exercises in your schools. So 10 of the 12 of the Columbine students died in the school library because they were told to go there to hide. and not to run. And so the training shifted both within law enforcement and school administrators and the way we think about school security, and specifically, and then writ large societally into this run, hide, fight. So that's where all of you, so right, run if you can, hide if it's an option, fight only as a last resort. And that existed for a very long time. Until essentially the rise of the AR-15. And then that's where my shifting began to think. Because run, hide, fight, when you think about it, exists, or the reason why we think about it is you're hiding because presumably you have time, right? Because handguns, what you're just trying to buy 3 or 4 minutes until law enforcement comes, but handguns in particular, because the way that they work and how many bullets you can have in them, gives, if you can hide, then law enforcement presumably could come in, right? And so the damage that can be done by an active shooter would be minimal until the AR-15, right? And so I don't, as I said when I wrote this, I don't like this, I don't love this, I don't like this. In fact, I hate it. But the reality is the AR-15 should shift the way we think about how we respond to active shooters. Now, how does this apply to law, or maybe it does? I mean, this is a failure of law and public policy to fix this problem. So the AR-15 is now the American weapon of choice, and so think about what that does. That has two consequences. One is, as if you're a perpetrator, you can kill a lot of people in a short amount of time, right? So 2 minutes. You can have 11, 12. I mean, you can do it, right? You can do even more, right? But presumably if you're walking through a school. The other is, because of that truncated time, you can have 12 people dead before law enforcement, assuming good law enforcement, I'm not even talking about Uvalde, comes in, right? So we've denied that time, which was the basis of run, hide, fight. And I started to think about that, right? Well, we run, of course, but the hide thing became really difficult. I don't know what, I'll talk to you a little bit about the alternative. The data was also clear many years later in the Pulse nightclub shooting. The men, a gay bar, the men in the bar hid in the bathroom, and that's where most of the slaughter occurred, right? And then I started to look at the cases, and there started to be more and more cases of active shooter in which engagement with the shooter by non-law enforcement became beneficial, because it bought time. That's all you're when I teach crisis management, that's all your runway is short, the best you can do is buy some time. This was true in the dance studio, the Monterey Park Lunar New Year or shooting in Chinatown. This was true in an LGBTQ club in Colorado. This was also true at a Waffle House in Tennessee. Engagement distracted the shooter and then bought more time for others. This is not perfect. We've also known instances, of course, where students have died with engagement with the shooter. But you can't deny that engagement for purposes of distraction might help. And law enforcement is now starting to think that way, as I think we should start to think that way. Run always. But the way we're starting to think about it now is what we would call avoid, deny, and defense. I am not convinced that hiding is a great idea anymore. I just don't. I mean, Uvalde is an example, but it's like, even the best response is going to be at least 2.5 minutes, and that's your best. That was in Buffalo, and still, I think half a dozen people died. And 50% of all active shooters end before law enforcement arrives, either by suicide or some sort of preventative action. So, and I hated this, so let me just go into the thinking about this and then being more public about it. One is it does concede to the failures of our gun legislation, or lack thereof, in the United States. It's just, it is adapting to the AR-15 rather than ending it. That's the world I'm in. I'm just sort of like, okay, yes, I would love unicorns and rainbows and no one having an AR-15. That's not going to happen before the next active shooter. second was it was sort of personal. I have 3 kids, and I'm like, run, you know, like, please do not engage, you know. I mean, on a personal level, you hope someone in the room is willing to do that in the cases that I described, but you kind of don't want it to be your person, right? I mean, and you want them to, if they can, to run. The third, and that gets to the final part, which is obviously it can sound like more good people armed. You know, the slogan of the NRA, all we need is more good people armed to fight bad people who arm. So I just want to put that to rest. The data is clear. That is not true. There's one case in the last 10 years where non-law enforcement, because they were armed, stopped a mass shooting. One. And I've got more than one a day now in the United States. That was in Indiana, and it was a good shot. I mean, it was in a shopping mall. More harm would have been done. And also just the generic point that if that were true, we would be the safest nation on earth, because we're the most armed nation on earth, and we're clearly not. So I did have challenges with going more public in this, and I just want to end, but I liked it with sort of the publicness of this. I did want to own this, right? This hide thing is like not working for us anymore. One, because I think it would make people realize the what's the difference with the AR-15, right, as compared to a handgun? Because I think, you know, those of us who are proponents of gun control, you know, we mix our guns because we don't know them. Like, I think actually we can make a pretty solid case for the AR-15 because it denies people's ability to run or hide, and it denies the time that law enforcement would be needed to get in. But also because a big part of my work is trying to give people agency in an age when we can often feel like we don't. I quote a Tennessee policeman after the Louisville shooting, the chief, who said, "I just don't want people to think," it's so many negatives because everyone's so worried about saying it, "they don't have options." Right, in other words, and so because these distractions do, you know, the shooter being distracted can then mean other people can help. That's what's happened in all those cases, right? You just get them to stop shooting, others will come forward and help. I went public with this. I was really concerned, and I'm a contributing writer for The Atlantic, and with an Atlantic piece that was titled "Rethinking Run, Hide, Fight." I knew it was going to happen. Within 5 seconds, the right wing, not even like Fox News, you know, sort of, Democrat or Obama appointee or whatever it was, says is for arming more people because of active shooters. Nowhere in my article did it say that. And so, you know, addressed it, and you get others to help you address it, but it did reflect, I think, what is happening now, this move to sort of avoid, so run always, right, if you can, but deny in defense, that we have to give ourselves agency in a world in which our public policy and our laws have failed to do so. So that's mine. Thank you.
Thank you. It might be worth reviewing one similarity and one difference from Janet's story. The similarity is, it sounds like for each story, there was a moment in which you each had colleagues or a community that were confronting the same puzzle, and maybe, if not in lockstep, were changing their view at the same time. And is that the case here within your professional field? What's the name of that field? Security and safety?
Safety and security. Yeah.
Safety and security. And is that like domestically defined, or it's a worldwide field?
Run, hide, fight is international.
But security
no one
and
has our
safety
gun
is-
issue. Yeah.
Okay.
But first responders generally is who I work with.
Got it. And are you feeling like you were sort of the one that pointed out,
What they're saying.
and that everybody kind of knew it somewhere inside, but you were articulating it, and then Fox News aside, were the first responders sort of more or less nodding along?
Yes, that's exactly. I mean, the community I work with, like you said, your stakeholder, the community I work with, well, this is getting into my career more, but just like, you know, part of it is I try to give, I'm in a school public policy behind, you know, what looks like just a bunch of first responders running into the house on fire, right?
Yeah.
That there's ways we think about risk and leadership and command and control and active
Got it.
shooter. And so I had been hearing this. I had been seeing it because I you know, do a lot of work in the media, and so every other day, you know, there's
Yeah.
and then just the big one was the Chinatown one, because because there's a video of it, and you saw the kid approach the shooter, and it kind of wasn't that hard, right? I mean, in other words, you know, there's a lot of reasons why people become active shooters, but he was easily distracted, and the kid, maybe he was 20, clearly saved, you know, a dozen lives, whatever it was, because he had already killed about 10 people at the other dance hall. So yeah, I think it was just trying to give voice to something out there that no one wanted to say. And I have to say, like, run, hide, fight, like Columbine, there's moments in your profession, right? Like, you know, Bowers or Dobbs or whatever, these moments that define a doctrine or a way you think about things. Columbine was it, right? Columbine was it.
And one difference, it sounds like, is for Janet, it was a circumstance that it sounds like had you call into question your existing self and maybe past decisions you'd made, or I mean, and then you were describing the forward-looking ramifications through your scholarship and everything else. And then, Juliette, it sounds like for you, it was just, no, there's a new circumstance. Yeah. You don't actually have to retcon anything about what came before. It's just now there's this thing called the AR-15, and you're changing your mind because the circumstances changed. Is that right?
But I think for Juliette, there's also, she was already famous, and she was doing it in an era of social media. And so that meant that there were downsides to being the leader that, for me, the downsides were just such deep disorientation and having to revive. You know when you break up a relationship you've been in for a really long time, and then you have to revise everything that ever happened between the two of you? It was like that, but over everything I had done for the last...
Everybody's been there, right?
You know, I was just rewriting everything, and so there was a huge turmoil inside me. But I didn't confront the world with it until I'd figured it out. I didn't have to right away.
Fascinating. And last question too. It sounds a little bit like when you linked it to agency and trying to give people a sense of agency. It makes me wonder if that artifact of the '60s Cold War, duck and cover. Which is like, there might be a nuclear bomb over your, this panel has really been a downer. But anyway, there might be a nuclear bomb over your school. You know, the federal government has met, and we have 2 recommendations for you.
Hide under your
The
desk.
following 18-slide PowerPoint deck will reveal them. But it was a way of saying at least there's something you can do, even if it's, and do you think that is sometimes ironically placative in that it causes people to make it seem like the unthinkable is more thinkable, and then they are not in a position to try to deny the upstream circumstances that lead to the unthinkable?
That's exactly, I mean, I think that's right. I mean, if I, you know, there are lots of, you know, things that I think about with COVID and blame, but I am not a doctor, and I knew what was about to happen. I mean, in other words, our federal government denying what was about to happen is why we have 1.1 million dead. And people like me, I was saying I thought 400,000 would die. That's not good, but in the world I am, much better than 1.1 million, or however many we have now. And the interesting thing about duck and cover is that, I mean, all of these are, what's, you know, I hate saying it, but what's the weaponry showing you? So duck and cover was in response to a limited nuclear attack that was survivable. 10 years later, duck and cover doesn't exist because we have the notion of sort of Armageddon, and that's when, right? We now have evacuation plans, right? Because if you can get out of the city, maybe you can survive. And so that also was one in which the weaponry had changed. And
It's funny
Johnson
that
was-
example is not just an analogy, it's also in your wheelhouse.
Yeah, exactly.
So here's the latest doctrine on that. News
Let
you
me
can
tell
use,
you
right?
about
HLS
duck and cover.
Beyond.
Yeah, but it is that too, that our ways of thinking about how protecting ourselves are going to change with how the weaponry changes.
And finally, to Janet's point about this having to be a public evolution in this era, it's funny to think that to the extent that you had like a stump speech PowerPoint deck with run, hide, fight in it, there was some moment where you're like, well, I guess I got to edit that slide and pick 3 things. It always has to be 3 things.
Yeah, exactly. Right, right.
Because
Fascinating.
we're academics.
Yes.
It's always the
3 things. So on to you, Ruth. Welcome.
Oh,
Thank you
gosh.
for joining us.
Thank you. So thank you for doing this.
Yeah.
It made me think about one of the joys of changing your name.
Your mic might be a little.
No,
It's on. Okay,
It's
we
on.
put it
It's
up a
on.
little bit.
There's folks in the back were having a hard time.
Can you all hear? Is it
Here,
working?
can I do something?
Yeah. Do something.
I think.
Go. There you go.
All right.
Is it working?
Here we go.
Is it working
Yeah.
now? Okay. Can
Okay.
you all hear me? Okay, great. So I am really glad. So like Janet, I started in teaching when there was no in fact, I remember the first email sent at Harvard Law School. I used to work at Langdale, and somebody read it. Oh my gosh, there's email. So I have the privilege that many of my earliest publications were, 1, not online, and 2, written under my maiden name, so no one would ever know of my change of heart.
Until today.
Until today. Until today. So I work a lot globally, and I came to Harvard in the heyday of international law, something that doesn't really exist anymore. But nonetheless, if you wanted to be an international lawyer, this was where you came. And
You mean the heyday of international law at Harvard?
At Harvard.
Not the heyday of international law.
At Harvard. At
Because I thought you were saying international law didn't exist anymore, and I'm glad to have
Well,
that
you know.
clarification.
There's some questions, but
Yeah.
that's
Fair
that's
enough.
for another panel.
Okay.
And I would be outraged because we were still very much in this post-colonial moment. We were still very much worried about and thinking about sort of the edifice of colonialism, its impact in the global South, its impact on minorities, its impact on kind of legacies and what people might refer to today as settler colonialism. And so much of the work that I did was really thinking about how to strengthen weak states and how to strengthen minority groups. So indigenous populations are about 6% of the entire world's population, but they are 16% of what we would call extreme poor. So these are people who live under $1 or less a day. And so my work was always chastising and kind of issuing condemnation on the leaders who represented many of these groups in international fora. How could you have signed such a treaty? What were you thinking? Where are your lawyers? I mean, my pent up angst about how badly serving these international instruments were came out in every article, every talk, every speech, and my work in counseling and giving advice to governments really came from that place of you should know better. Like, here's the way the world works. That provision should not have ended up there. Like, were you sleeping when this negotiation was taking place? Mm-hmm. And it was uber self-righteous, uber critical, and very much this sense that people with power were not using that power for the good of their people. And I spent years from that platform writing, debating, contending with lots of ghosts behind these international treaties. But I always thought it was the state that was problematic. And it was the state that needed to be brought to task. And it was corrupt leadership that needed to be disciplined. And then I got thrust into an international negotiation in which indigenous people were demanding something from the state. We're demanding recognition and protection for their knowledge and for their lifestyles and for their artifacts to be recognized, and for them to have the ability to prevent people from coming to, say, places that had been designated reservations in the United States, or going to sites in the Amazon that indigenous communities viewed as sacred. And all of a sudden, I realized that my work, which had really been built on, you've got to create ways for minority groups to become a part of the state. You've got to recognize them as equal citizens. You've got to give them citizenship rights and agency. And in those months of hearing and listening to indigenous groups saying, we actually don't want to be part of the state. We actually want to have opportunities to define our own sense of well-being and our own livelihoods and what constitutes property to us or innovation to somebody else. We want to be in a position to continue to live our lives as we think best. And that the best thing you can do for us is not to give us equality in the sense that you think of it, but to give us structural equality, to give us the opportunity to decide the kinds of lives that we want to live on reservations or off reservations. And I'll tell you that it was a profound moment for me to sit there as a lead negotiator, negotiating a treaty in which what I really wanted to do was to say to these groups of people who had no status and still don't, no standing in international law, cannot vote on the very treaties that we were negotiating, quote unquote, on their behalf. And I had always believed in the Westphalian state. I'd always thought, we just need to get democracy functioning better. We just need to give people more voting rights. We just need to do all of these things, and everyone would want to come jump on board. And to hear from a group of people who had their own sense of governance, their own sense of structure, who had been, in my own words, the victims that needed restitution and reparations, say, that's actually not what we need. We don't actually need statehood. We don't actually need this kind of recognition. What we want is the ability to safeguard our own sense of well-being and to safeguard our knowledge assets and not have them become patents or copyrights or trademarks and not have them become the objects of an intellectual property system that has worked well for many of you states, but that we really don't want a part of. And it was a day of reckoning because I had put myself in a place in which I thought I was representing their interests. But in reality, their interests were nothing like what I had supposed them to be. And so the treaties that I had spent years criticizing and debating, and the leaders that I had spent so much time saying, you're just corrupt and you've gotten it wrong, were in fact the leaders that I had to turn around to and say, okay, tell me what it is that you think would make your people better off. And it was such a profound shift for me because it didn't happen on social media and it didn't happen in a mailroom or copy room, but it happened in this international space in which my task was to represent positions that I thought were best for the people that I was representing. And in fact, they turned around and said, no, it was not. And I had to begin to see their interests through their eyes and thereby reshape kind of the platforms from which I was operating. It was a humbling experience. It was intellectually, it was sort of whiplash, right? Because I'd written all these pieces, written all these articles. I had spoken on their behalf even when they were not in the room, and it turns out I was only speaking for me. And I think that was the profound thing, right? Is the things that we believe are good and that we believe are defensible may in fact not be the thing that the folks that we purport to speak for want. And having to make that turn and to do it publicly when I had been appointed precisely because of all these things that I had written was pretty humbling.
Wow. How long ago did you experience the shift? When was this?
So this was 5 years ago, and I am still working through it, both in the US and in other areas of the world where I work with governments and work with indigenous groups and get to listen to what their interests are.
And you were sort of joking about this at the beginning, have you announced your change of perspective, or has your writing simply, without comment, reflected the new perspective, and you're counting on that maiden name?
I am definitely counting on that maiden name. And my writings have shifted without a public announcement.
Oh. We've made news today.
Yes, do not put this on social media.
It's possible it is streaming. Are we streaming right now? No.
Okay, great.
There's going to be like a technical difficulties image when it goes online. We can consult later about permissions, yes. Anyway.
It's Chinese parliament meeting today. It's like someone just disappears from the video.
Just clean me out, wash me out. I think it's hard for those of you who have already read the McGirt case, where Justice Gorsuch really essentially turned much of Tulsa back to reservation land. It's very odd to sit in a negotiating room and fellow Americans, Native Americans, are in the room but have no legal standing, cannot vote, cannot speak, cannot even be recognized because they are standing for a position that is very different from the official US position in an international negotiation. Even when the negotiation is about Native American issues, Native Americans cannot speak. And so what ends up is a coalition of First Nations, and there is an effort to utilize the agency, say, of Canadian Canadian Americans or Native peoples, or the Amazon, folks representing the Amazon. And it is a very strange feeling to be in that room and recognize that there are multiple sovereignties in the room, but really only one way of being represented, and it's not theirs.
And last question on your narrative, this seems a profound enough shift that it might have implications beyond the indigeneity framework that you were describing. And I'm wondering, since you've had some time to sit with it, do you know what those might be? Are there other areas of application for this realization about, I don't know, is it something about agency theory and representation? Is it something about unions and companies, or other times where there are counterparties and we're trying to distill them into a certain framework that might not be capturing the full range of what's going on?
I mean, I think it's very similar to Janet's moment, right? Because when you think of one group as weaker, more vulnerable, and therefore angelic, and another as dominant and, you know, kind of the majority and therefore devilish, you end up in a world in which you actually impute on others, and in particular circumstances when you wield power, you are imputing your own sense of rightness and goodness on people that have no idea of what your framework is, but you are purporting to speak for them. And I think across all kinds of claims about equality, about counter-majoritarian tendencies, about free speech, we have a tendency to speak for people. And what I realized was that the people for whom I was speaking, I had barely spoken to.
Yeah.
And that's a really profound thing, because when you believe in the rightness of your position, you will speak of it and you will inject it on behalf of others that you think are the victims of the other side. And that's, for me, I realized what a dangerous place I had been in.
So it's one of the ways I think about it is that our theories about the world are like glasses, and we put them on and we can see things. And we can't see the things that the glasses aren't designed to identify and make, funnel into the internal visual apparatus. There's a filter, there's a blind spotting. And when you have the luck to switch to the new glasses and still remember the old ones and what they made visible, but also have the new ones and see what they make visible, you can hover over two different realities. And it gives you a moral, a moment of moral I mean, it can strip you down, and as you say, it humbles you, but it also gives you some choice about where you want to be with respect to the powers that you relate to. And that, did you feel liberated when you had that realization that you were freed from, I've gotten rid of a lot of baggage. It's not, I don't have to be loyal to that. Or did you feel naked and exposed and apologetic, and what was the affect of it?
I felt liberated.
Okay.
I felt liberated because I realized that I had been blind, right? So for me, it wasn't even switching glasses or getting a new prescription. It was
switching a world.
Seeing for the first time. It was really seeing for the first time, and seeing through the eyes of those whom I really wanted to serve but had not been serving.
So just carrying on that metaphor a little bit in its variations, I'm wondering if you find yourself talking to somebody that within this metaphor is still on the old prescription from your point of view. Is the fact that like, oh yeah, I remember when those Ray-Bans were hot. Does that lead to more tension because you're kind of like, I'm further along the path? Or is it, no, I know you more. You and I used to be the same.
Yeah.
Yeah. What do you think? Well, no, I think the glasses metaphor, I think the challenge is the rose-colored glasses, if I can say that in my world. It's like to talk about, the things I do, like, living with climate change, or living with, how do you pandemic, like you're accepting the badness from the beginning. That is just I don't know the alternative, right? And so I think for me, it's not, run, hide, fight is horrible. Lots of criticisms around the generation lockdown and what they had to go through. But I think the challenge for me is just people don't want to talk about it, or they want to, they want to hate the NRA, they want to whatever, and hate gun owners and hate a certain political party, but they're not, that doesn't give anyone any tools. So that's, for me, that's the bigger challenge than they've changed their mind. It's just like, why are we talking about this, or this is horrible, or, I always get the condescending, but you're not thinking about, X. And I'm like, yeah, I am for gun control. At the moment, there are 20 kids in a room. I'm not thinking about gun control. I'm not gonna satisfy. I can't satisfy that problem or address that problem right there. And the same thing. I mean, I say this to my students, like we're gonna have a horrible hurricane season this coming season, and on the East Coast. It's just, you heard it here. And like, yeah.
The Farmer's
Thank
Almanac.
you.
Yeah, you were saying, we could
This,
sit
event.
here and debate climate change, which I'm happy to do, and I have all the right, liberal creds and like everything like that. I'm not gonna have a discussion about BP and Texaco, when the hurricane's coming, because I'll have it right after, but I'm not gonna have it during. And this is, I think, one of the challenges I face is like the sort of more progressive, like, I'm not actually thinking big. I am thinking big,
We have a few minutes left. I'm curious if people have questions, short comments, any thoughts?
While people are thinking, I want to say something about Juliette's point, because I think, in the law school in particular, where everyone comes here, and I see a number of my former 1L students, everyone comes here wanting justice, right? At least first day one of 1L year, everyone wants justice. They want to do justice. They want to be a part of the justice movement.
And then they have lunch.
And yes, and then they eat. But I think it's important to say this, and I hear this in Juliette and in Janet's and Mike's stories, that knowing and believing something can sometimes be sort of an excuse, maybe unconsciously, for withdrawing from debate and simply reverting or resorting to advocacy for the thing that you believe, so much so that, like a litigator, you drink the Kool-Aid, right? You become what it is because it's what you believe. And I think in particular that is true when you think you are defending the powerless, when you think you are taking up arms for those who cannot take up arms for themselves, because that is the thing that justice calls us to do, and we feel good doing it. And I think we have to remember, and this was, like I said, a very humbling thing for me, that if I am fighting for a justice that does not feel just for those for whom I am fighting, it is not true justice.
I observe that for each of your stories, they represent a change of heart or of view in the face of a circumstance, of a story about something happening in the world, one way or the other, rather than, I read this article by so-and-so, and I was like, Eureka, they're right.
We only do that with your articles, John.
You're very kind. Maybe I'll start writing them again. But yeah, that is kind of the question. Like, so much of our manifestations and identities are as academics. What does it say that our examples are in encountering people and stories rather than other argument, maybe not in the litigious mode, that's still not what really changed our minds?
So I really want to get off of that train. I picked a story where I changed my mind, but I remember exactly what I was wearing. I remember exactly what the light was in the room. I remember exactly what the blossoms on the trees. I was done with my first year in teaching at Hamilton College as an English professor, and I was reading Catherine McKinnon's first science article, and everything changed.
Wow.
And it all came off the page.
Wow.
So
That happens too.
so the story I told you was how I shifted my orientation towards that article. And I've been teaching that article as strong as I can for years now here at the law school, because I want students to have access to that mind-blowing realization. But I also want them to have access to the idea that maybe it doesn't explain everything. And so, but I was an English professor. For me, reading is, maybe I'm different than other more, one of the reasons I love a law school is it's so action oriented. And so it might be that that's really just me, that the
Janet,
text can just enter into my body like, oh my God, I'm possessed. And
Transubstantiation of text. I like it.
yeah,
But
that can happen.
can I just ask, have you told Catherine?
She doesn't want to hear from me.
Well, there's a story there too.
Actually,
I know, this
but
one-
if you all tell her that I love her, I would be very grateful to you. I
Talk
just
about
also
playing the long
disagree with
game
her.
with the panel.
Exactly.
It's the third year, but
Erased from this, there's just going to be a video of like 3 empty chairs.
Yeah. And Janet, am I right? I could be wrong. I feel like you are among the faculty here who maybe have a norm or a rule in class that says no first-person stories?
That's in family law.
Okay.
I do say no first-person narratives not because I don't think they're important, but because I think they're self-canceling. I think that one's own personal experience with a family law rule can represent how bad the rule is, and you can be sitting next to somebody who's had an experience with that very same rule who was saved by that rule because of the very diverse ways in which law hits different families. So I do that, but that's not to deny that personal experience is important in my teaching. It's crucial. I just don't think it gives you a special authority to shut down other views.
Got it. Well, these views have been so fantastic, so much so that it's as if time has stood still. It's been 12:25
Yeah, the clock
for the
is
past
stuck.
hour.
I kept looking at it and I was like,
I kept looking, I was like, the time is not right.
The confusing thing was that stopped clock was right
Yes.
while we were here,
Yes.
and then that got really confusing. But
Thank you.
thank you so much for
Thank you.
Nice